June 6, 1944. 3 in the morning. Adolf Hitler is asleep in his mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden. His standing orders are clear. Do not wake him unless the Reich is on fire. His generals know better than to disturb the Führer's rest. 300 miles away, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the man personally responsible for defending the coast of France, is also asleep in his bed in Germany. He left 2 days ago to celebrate his wife's birthday, convinced the weather was too terrible for an invasion. And at that exact moment, 5,000 ships carrying 156,000 men are crossing the English Channel toward the beaches of Normandy. The largest invasion force in human history is about to hit the coast of France, and the 2 men who could stop it are asleep because their intelligence services told them it couldn't possibly happen today. How does the most sophisticated military machine in Europe get caught completely by surprise? How does Germany, with its legendary intelligence service, its encryption technology, its professional officer corps, failed to see the most obvious military operation in history until the first paratroopers are already on the ground? Today we're going beyond the beaches to examine the intelligence war. This is the story of how the Allies didn't just outfight the Germans, they outthought them. They turned Germany's own spies into weapons, and they convinced Hitler to defend the wrong beach until it was far too late. This is WW2 Battlegrounds. Let's start with what should have been Germany's greatest advantage, the Abwehr. German military intelligence, one of the most feared spy agencies in the world, led by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, a veteran of German intelligence dating back to World War I. The Abwehr had thousands of agents, cutting-edge technology, and a virtually unlimited budget. On paper, they should have been untouchable, but there was rot at the core of the Nazi intelligence apparatus. And it started at the very top with Hitler himself. Hitler didn't trust anyone, so he deliberately created competing intelligence agencies to keep them fighting each other instead of potentially plotting against him. You had the Abwehr under Canaris. You had the SD, the SS Intelligence Service under Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich. You had the Gestapo. You had military intelligence for each branch of the armed forces. These agencies hated each other. They competed for resources, for Hitler's favor, for access to information. They hoarded intelligence instead of sharing it. They sabotaged each other's operations. They spent more time fighting internal bureaucratic wars than fighting the actual enemy. In Britain, it was the opposite. MI5, MI6, and the codebreakers at Bletchley Park worked together in an integrated system. They shared information instantly. They coordinated operations. When they captured a German spy, every relevant agency knew about it within hours. This difference in organizational culture would prove fatal. Early in the war, MI5, British Domestic Security, began a systematic hunt for German spies operating in Britain. They had an advantage the Germans didn't know about. The codebreakers at Bletchley Park were reading German encrypted communications. Every time the Abwehr sent instructions to an agent in Britain, the British knew about it before the agent did. Within months, MI5 had captured every single German spy operating in the United Kingdom. Every single one. They gave each spy the same choice: face a firing squad for espionage, or become a double agent working for Britain. Most chose to live. This created what the British called the double-cross system, and it was devastatingly effective. For years leading up to D-Day, the Abwehr believed they had a sprawling network of loyal agents feeding them vital intelligence about Britain. Troop movements, production figures, military planning, everything. In reality, every single report those agents sent back to Germany was written by British intelligence officers in London. The Abwehr wasn't getting bad information. They were living inside a completely fabricated reality constructed by their enemies. And because Bletchley Park was reading the German responses, the British could see exactly what the Germans believed. If a particular lie seemed to be working, they'd reinforce it with reports from other fake agents. If the Germans seemed skeptical, they'd adjust the story. It was a closed feedback loop. The Germans were interrogating their own delusion, and every answer confirmed the lie. Now let's talk about Enigma. The Enigma machine was Germany's greatest technological achievement in cryptography. A mechanical encryption device that generated codes the Germans believed were mathematically unbreakable. Even if you captured an Enigma machine, The number of possible settings was astronomical, trillions of combinations. The Germans were so confident in Enigma that they used it for everything: battle plans, supply requests, intelligence reports, even personal messages between commanders. They believed their communications were completely secure. They were wrong. At Bletchley Park, a team of mathematicians led by Alan Turing had built primitive computers that could break Enigma encryption. By 1944, they were reading thousands of German messages every single day. The British called this intelligence ultra, and it was the most closely guarded secret of the war. The Germans had clear evidence their codes were compromised. Allied ships intercepted German U-boats with impossible accuracy. Supply convoys were ambushed at exactly the right time and place. Bombing raids hit targets the Germans thought were secret. But instead of questioning Enigma, the Abwehr blamed other things: traitors, careless officers, bad luck. They couldn't accept that their unbreakable code had been broken, so they invented alternative explanations. This is technological hubris. When you're so convinced your system is perfect, you explain away every failure as something else. By June 1944, the British knew the exact location of every major German unit in France. They knew Rommel's supply situation. They knew which commanders were competent and which weren't. They knew what the Germans expected for the invasion, and they used that knowledge to feed the Germans exactly what they wanted to hear. The Allies created a fictional army, First United States Army Group, FUSAG, supposedly commanded by General George Patton, the Germans' most feared opponent, and stationed in southeast England opposite Pas-de-Calais. FUSAG didn't exist. It was inflatable tanks, wooden airplanes, and fake radio traffic. But the Germans believed in it completely because their agents told them it was real. Those agents, of course, were all double agents working for Britain. The man running the German intelligence analysis for the Western Front was Colonel Alexis von Wren. By all accounts, he was brilliant, but he was trapped in an impossible situation. In a dictatorship, telling the leader what he doesn't want to hear is dangerous. Hitler was convinced the invasion would come at Calais because it was the shortest crossing, the most obvious strategic choice. When intelligence suggested Normandy might be the target, it was dismissed as noise. Von Wren's department had been flooded with reports from double-cross agents, especially Agent Garbo, all saying the same thing. The main invasion would come at Calais. Normandy was just a diversion to draw German forces away from the real target. By June 1944, von Wren's intelligence estimates were completely divorced from reality. He reported that the Allies had 79 divisions in England preparing for the invasion. The actual number was 47. He had invented 32 divisions. Divisions that didn't exist. Why? Because the British double agents had reported them, and von Wren couldn't admit to Hitler that German intelligence had somehow missed a third of the Allied army. So instead of correcting the error, he reinforced it. German intelligence officers were helping the Allies lie to Hitler to save their own careers. This is confirmation bias at a strategic level. The Germans weren't analyzing intelligence objectively. They were looking for evidence that confirmed what Hitler wanted to believe, and filtering out anything that contradicted it. The night of June 5, 1944, 24 hours before the invasion, the Germans had one last chance to catch the Allies. The French resistance had been instructed to listen for specific code phrases broadcast over BBC radio. When they heard those phrases, they'd know the invasion was imminent and begin sabotage operations. German intelligence knew about these codes. They'd been monitoring BBC broadcasts for months. On the evening of June 5, they intercepted the critical phrase, the first line of a poem by Paul Verlaine, "The long sobs of autumn's violins." This was it. The invasion was coming within 48 hours. The warning went out to the 15th Army at Pas-de-Calais. They went to full alert. Units were mobilized. Defenses were manned. But somehow, the warning never reached the 7th Army. The army actually defending Normandy. The army that was about to be hit. Why? Because the 15th Army commander took it seriously. But the 7th Army commander looked at the weather, and decided no invasion was possible in such terrible conditions. He ignored the warning. Rommel made the same calculation. He looked at the storm over the English Channel and decided he had time to visit his wife. He believed his own intuition over the intelligence reports. This is the final failure of the Abwehr. They had pieces of the puzzle. They had the BBC codes. They had reports of unusual Allied activity. They even had some agents reporting concerns about Normandy. But the institutional culture of the Nazi regime, the backstabbing, the fear of contradicting Hitler, the overconfidence in their own technology, prevented them from putting the pieces together until paratroopers were already landing in French fields. At dawn on June 6, when the reports of the landings started coming in, the German High Command still didn't believe it was the real invasion. They thought it was a feint. They kept the 15th Army, nearly 150,000 men, sitting at Calais waiting for the real attack. They kept them there for 7 weeks. By the time Hitler finally authorized moving those troops to Normandy, the Allies had broken out, and the liberation of France was inevitable. What can we learn from the intelligence collapse on D-Day? First, organizational structure matters. When agencies compete instead of cooperate, truth gets lost in the friction. The British agencies worked as a team. The German agencies worked as rivals. That difference decided the war. Second, confirmation bias is deadly at any level, but at the strategic level it's catastrophic. The Germans stopped asking, "Where is the enemy?" and started asking, "How do these reports prove the enemy is where we think they are?" Once you stop being willing to be wrong, you've already lost. Third, technology is only as good as the humans using it. The Germans had excellent encryption, excellent radio monitoring, excellent organizational systems. But when the people interpreting that data are either compromised or too afraid to tell the truth, the technology becomes worthless. The Allies won D-Day before the first soldier hit the beach. They won it in the back rooms of MI5 where double agents typed fake reports. They won it at Bletchley Park where mathematicians broke unbreakable codes. They won it by understanding that intelligence isn't just about gathering information. It's about controlling what your enemy believes. There's a grim postscript to this story. Within months of D-Day, Hitler dissolved the Abwehr entirely. Admiral Canaris, the man who'd led it for years, was arrested. The Gestapo discovered he'd been involved in plots against Hitler. In April 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, Canaris was executed at Flossenburg concentration camp, stripped naked and hanged with piano wire. Whether Canaris deliberately sabotaged the Abwehr or simply failed to see how compromised it was, we'll never know for certain. Some historians believe he was actively working against the Nazis. Others think he was simply outplayed by the British. What we do know is that on the most important day of the war, when everything hung in the balance, German intelligence didn't just fail, it vanished. And that failure cost Hitler the war. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to WW2 Battlegrounds for more deep dives into the decisions and failures that shaped history. Here's a question for you. If you were a German intelligence officer in 1944, looking at conflicting reports about Normandy versus Calais, what would have convinced you to question the official story? Or was the Allied deception so complete that seeing through it was impossible? Next time, we're examining the Battle of Kursk and why Hitler's obsession with wonder weapons led him to throw away his last strategic reserve on the Eastern Front. Until then, this is WW2 Battlegrounds, where history meets strategy.